Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte, the podcast which asks the tricky questions about the world around us. I'm George Parrett, and today we're asking the question, does having a side hustle make you more productive at work? Thank you so much for downloading this week's episode of The Green Room. As ever, I'm joined by a co-host, and this week, for her first time, it's Dara Latinwo. How are you, Dara?
Hi there, I'm really good. Really excited about my first podcast.
And you've chosen a good one to kick things off with. We're going to be talking about side hustles today, and we have some excellent guests who you'll introduce shortly. But I guess we're doing this podcasting as a bit of a side hustle from our everyday lives anyway. And I think across our company, there are all sorts of side hustlers. We've got an executive assistant who directs a gospel musical and runs a radio show in her spare time. And we've got a journalist for a national newspaper who doubles up as a marketeer for the team. So it's quite a varied landscape, really. And I think 1 in 4 people have a side hustle, which is quite an amazing stat.
That's pretty mind-blowing, yeah. And I like the idea of this as an internal side hustle, this Green Room podcast. But the only thing that worries me is that EA with her own radio host show, a bit of competition. I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Great. So who have we got this week, Dara?
So today we have with us Riteesh Mishra. Riteesh is a manager in our human resources team. However, outside of the day job, he's the head coach and manager of Charlton Athletics women's team and the founder and ambassador of the Transition Phase, a program he set up to help athletes through career transitions. Our other guest is Nick Philpot. Nick is the founder of Yoke, a coffee, breakfast and lunch spot in London, so right by our offices as well. He originally started Yoke as a side hustle while working in strategy and consulting at Deloitte, before taking the plunge and committing full-time. Welcome also.
Hi there, thanks for having me.
But before we dive into our chat, let's break the ice with the icebreaker bucket. Okay.
And Dara, as this is your first episode, it's important that you have to answer this as well, so we get to know you.
Oh, okay.
No pressure.
Ooh. What was the first thing you bought with your own money? I'm going to start with you, George, actually.
Oh, crikey.
I think that's quite interesting.
It's so hard to remember a time when I had my own money to spend. I'm not sure. Was it possibly? Must have been a music album of some sort. Is it? It's probably Spice Girls.
Standard.
Yeah, I think it was. It was
Wow.
mid-90s classic. But yeah, it's a long time ago now.
So that's what you want, what you really, really want.
Very good.
Yeah.
Just had to get it in there. Couldn't help myself. What about you, Riteesh?
It's a difficult one to think back. I think it was a sports magazine. You used to get the football collector's item magazines where you kind of had to make a full team week on week. I think I used to spend my pocket money on that. So
there you go, destined from the start.
Yeah.
Day one, isn't it?
I guess mine must have been food, staying also on brand. I think probably I really used to love fizzy chewits.
Oh yeah.
So good, the lemonade flavour. I actually once wrote a letter to Leaf Corporation saying, why have you stopped making them? Because they were obviously the best chewits. Anyway, so I imagine it was a pack of fizzy chewits.
And insight into Yoke's future and,
Yeah,
opportunities
exactly.
here, expansion roll into fizzy chewits.
Additive high. Yeah, delicious though.
Yeah. And Dara, how about you?
Okay, I left it to last, so I had time to think of an interesting answer. I think, like Nick, probably food related. I'm a big fan of Belgian buns, so I probably spent my first 75p on a full-on big iced Belgian bun. So that's me.
Good old days, probably £4.50 now. Aren't they?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, that's brilliant. I think let's dive into this week's question, which is, does having a side hustle make you more productive at work? And we have 2 excellent guys here, Nick and Riteesh. Thank you so much for coming, and hopefully we can pick your brains about what makes a side hustle. What is a side hustle? Your experiences doing a side hustle, and maybe inspire some listeners to partake in their own side hustle. Riteesh, before we start talking about Charlton's football season, and as we're entering the business season, business end of the year, could you tell us a bit more about your story a little bit?
Sure. So professional football is something I've been involved in for a very long time. I grew up like so many young boys, and now great to say young females as well, who will have the opportunity to become professional footballers. I grew up in Nottingham and supported Nottingham Forest. My dream was to become a professional footballer. and I was kind of living that dream as a youngster, and I was very fortunate that I graduated through Nottingham Forest's academy, my boyhood club, right around the corner to myself, and I signed kind of a quite lengthy contract with the football club. Fortunately for me, which was something I loved at the time, I left education quite early, so I left school and finished my GCSEs with the club. And for me at the time, that's, what better thing to do? Stop your education and play football full time. So unfortunately, when I got to kind of the age of 19, 20, I had a career-threatening injury, and I'll probably come onto it later on, but that led me to education. So I had a bit of time out of education. I had to go back into education, and went on a athletic scholarship at university. Got graduated, still wanted to be involved in professional sport, so I carried on coaching whilst I was at university. Still loved being part of professional football, and so since moving down to London for a professional career, I suppose, I've always been involved in coaching and football. So I've always had professional work and football coaching as a side, and I went through a phase really when I graduated where I had no idea what I wanted to do. I wanted to try and use my behaviours that I learned through elite sport, as well as put my degree to some kind of use. So I kind of also started the initiative called the Transition Phase, which back then in 2013 was kind of just a little project that I was doing myself, helping individuals that were within my network and circle. Whereas now it's something that I'm very passionate about. So I support what I would consider elite athletes who are at that junior level of their career, with understanding the transition from education and elite sport into professional work. So I talk about my experience really and help them understand their opportunities in the graduate market, how they can use their elite sporting background to inspire people, how they can talk with impact, and help other people who might be, at an interview understand really, what's the difference between elite level sport and recreational sport, and how that potentially gives them something different. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
Okay, great. And we'll probably unpick a bit more of that down the line. But Nick, how about you tell us your story?
That sounds amazing, by the way. So I used to work at Deloitte, and in fact monitor Deloitte. I was in the strategy team at Deloitte, then became monitor Deloitte. I started on the scholar scheme, so I worked during my gap year and then worked a bit during uni. But then I was here after university for about just under 5 years. And towards the end of that time, I started up Yoke, which is the business that I now run. And it started off as a pop-up. Basically knew that I always had it in my head that I wanted to start a business of my own. Didn't really know what it was going to be. The more I thought about it, the more I realised that food was the thing I was most passionate about and what I really wanted to pursue. Didn't have any experience in hospitality or catering though, so I sort of ummed and ahed about it for a long time and sat on the fence and bored all my friends talking about it, and eventually thought I should just either do this or shut up. So I started doing pop-ups. I started doing pop-ups just at a little cafe in Finsbury Park around the corner from where I live, and tried it out on Sundays while working still full-time at Deloitte, and it went well and sort of grew a bit from there, so I started to take it more seriously. So did it alongside full-time Deloitte work initially for 3 or 4 months, then was kindly allowed to take a sabbatical, which I did for about 3 months again. And then came back to the firm, but came back part-time for about another, 9 months or so. So quite a while I was doing, and which was great because it allowed me to do a bit of both. And so after that, eventually kind of got to a stage where I had to kind of commit or not. And so went for it then. And after some it's been a while coming, slow progress, but eventually after lots of pop-ups, some great, some terrible, kind of got lucky with our last spot, which was near Liverpool Street, went really well there. And off the back of that, we've opened our first permanent spot here in New Street Square.
Excellent. That's fantastic. And it sounds like you've both fallen into side hustles, which you're very passionate about. You've eaten food, Nick, and F&B and football as well for you, Riteesh. Mm-hmm. Is that a big driver for both of you, would you say?
From my perspective, I feel you could only have worked for me if I was really passionate about it, because it is hard doing both at the same time. But I was very motivated to do it. was happy to make other sacrifices if need be to make sure that I had the time to do everything properly. So yeah, it's never felt like a chore. It's always felt like a great opportunity to be able to do both. But I imagine it would be tough to do if you weren't really up for it.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Certainly, from my point of view, it's not for a financial gain because you put so much time and effort and energy into something else outside of Deloitte. So it certainly, I think it has to be a passion. And I still, to this day, I mean, I coach every evening pretty much during the week and on the weekends. And if I went into that thinking it's a chore and another job, I think I'd really struggle. But I still see it as something I love to do. It's difficult sometimes when it's freezing cold, rainy, and you're outside. You're outside. And actually, this Sunday we had all 4 seasons. We had a game, and it started to hailstone at kickoff.
Oh, man.
Then the sun came out, so we thought, right, we've got past this. Started to throw it down with rain, and then blustering wind, gales. But no, for me, if it wasn't a passion and I didn't love doing it, I think I would really struggle. But I've always wanted to have, I suppose, different things to work towards and different purposes. I think it goes back to when I had to stop playing professional football, and that was kind of forced due to injury. And I was always known within my peer group and in my family, particularly with the cultural background that I come from, having somebody who was a professional footballer, it was like all I was known for in my family, and kind of for that to be taken away from you through injury, I kind of felt a bit of loss of identity. And I went through a period where I really struggled with that. But coming out of it, I thought, I never really want to feel like I've got one identity or one purpose. I want to always have different things to work towards. So I think that the fear of having no identity, I suppose, and the fear of potentially failing at one thing, whereas now I feel like I have the security of multiple things I'm doing, and I think it just gives me a bit of fulfillment.
And just on that, in terms of the security, you know, one of the things that, or some of the research that we see says that, you know, people are going into side hustles because of financial necessity, wanting that financial security. I read, or I think someone told me the other day, that if you don't have at least 5 different income streams, you're not financially stable, which is a bit arresting. But I know, but to that point, you know, how do you find that, you know, having these different interests or different passions, you know, it fulfills you or kind of supports you a little bit more, provides you that stability, I guess? Riteesh?
I mean, well, for my, it definitely made me a lot less financially secure doing Yoke. Sadly, I wish it was the other way around. But I mean, going from initially when I was able to do both, that was fantastic. It definitely gave me the security and confidence to go and pursue it in a way that would have been hard otherwise. I mean, essentially for the first 2 or 3 years, Yoke made no money from it at all, was just kind of scratching around. Some pop-ups made a bit of money, but then you'd invest it in the next one, then that might lose some. So there was no real financial gain. It actually took quite a lot of investment and just support generally and savings. But couldn't have done it without knowing that at least I had a proper job that was going to pay a regular salary. Even when I went part-time, it was at least I had something. But I mean, it definitely wasn't done, you know, hopefully in the long term, maybe Yoke will be a money maker. Feels like a long way off at the minute, but yeah, I mean, it was again, I'm sure there's so many other things that you could be doing which could be immediately financially rewarding, but in my case, it wasn't that, but it was more that it was more the other way around, that Deloitte was a great facilitator for it, and having that stable job, and you know, Deloitte was a facilitator and supporting it in many other ways, but definitely financially it helped.
Was there like a eureka moment when you thought, all right, this is the sign, I'm going to do this now?
I don't know. I mean, originally Yoke the idea was kind of breakfast led. In the end, we do. I mean, partly why the name is Yoke, but I mean, in the end, we're grab and go in all time. You know, breakfast, lunch, coffee. We like, you know, it's all important to us business wise. But initially, the idea came to it from going to lots of seated breakfasts in London, and they were all just really bad. And I was getting confused. I was really confused as to why this should be the case. I mean, London food is great. Obviously, so much choice and amazing stuff out there. But breakfast, you can compare somewhere like New York or you know, or other meals of the day here. it's just not that great. It's always a bit of an afterthought. And that was at the stage when I was thinking, well, I really want to do food, but I don't really know anything about food apart from being like a keen home cook. But I've never run a kitchen. So I was thinking, well, what is there an angle that I can go down that means that if I do something niche enough, if I really focus on that and become a bit of a geek in one area, could I and could yolk be something that is differentiated and better than what else is out there? And so that was kind of, I literally had 3 really bad eggs Benedicts in a row, like overcooked eggs, soggy muffins. So that was the moment I thought, got to do breakfast. Like, got to pursue
it's the most important meal of the day.
It really is, exactly. And so it kind of, that was the angle we went down initially, and then the business evolved from there, and we did loads of other things. We did seated, takeaway, breakfast, lunch, dinner, all of that. But that was kind of the initial moment of thinking, need to go for it.
And Riteesh, for you, it was, I mean, the sort of the injury probably set you on a course for your sort of eventual coaching career. But I'm guessing there's quite a lot of decisions between that moment and where you are now.
I mean, when I stopped playing, it was very early on in my career. I was 19, so the way professional football worked back then, I signed a 2-year scholarship effectively. Between 16 and 18, I think I was earning £50 to £75 a week as an apprenticeship. It's almost like an apprenticeship here. And then I signed a bit more of a lengthy contract as a professional. And it was only at that point where financially it was quite rewarding, but it got taken away from me quite quickly because I was pretty much surplus to requirements really with my injury. So I never, fortunately, when I look back at it, I never really felt the financial gains of professional football, which a lot of people would do now. So it's never really been a financial driver for me. And apart from having probably a 6 to 12 month period where I fell out of love with football, going back in as a coach, you have to do your hours as a volunteer while you're getting your badges. So I probably 6 or 7 years worth of volunteer coaching or kind of one-to-one coaching at the weekends where you earn a little bit of money. It's only really been the last couple of seasons where, due to the nature of my role now and I suppose the level that I'm working at, I am getting paid for it. But it's never been the main driver. I think to Nick's point, though, Deloitte and where I've worked previously has given me that solid foundation that actually I don't see it as a risk to dedicate my time to pursuing other goals. And the transition phase, again, it's more I'm providing people advice, guidance, being a bit of a mentor for them. It's for their gain mainly, and just for me to talk about my experiences rather than a financial gain, I suppose.
I wish my cousin could have spoken to you.
Yeah, we spoke briefly at the start, right?
Yeah, because my cousin, like you, was trying to pursue professional football, and he was playing for Stevenage.
Okay.
But yeah, he got an injury, and so now, randomly enough, he's a high fashion shoe designer.
Wow. Okay.
So working for Nicholas Kirkwood. But wow. I think having that kind of support, that explanation of what skills are sort of transferable across different areas would have definitely helped make his journey to becoming a shoe designer a lot smoother. But just on that point of skills, you guys both mentioned that Deloitte gave you a solid foundation, I guess financially, but also skills-wise. What skills did working with presumably strong teams in a Deloitte environment where you get lots of training? What did that support do for starting up a side hustle?
I think if I look at football coaching to start with, very similar to Deloitte, you're dealing with people all the time. And the fortunate thing with my role also has been at Deloitte I've dealt with partners and directors and fairly senior stakeholders. So I've kind of gotten used to the skills of how to manage a relationship, how to approach specific conversations, how to deal with fairly pressurized situations, especially when I work for internal client services, so effectively my clients often are partners, and you want to do a good job for them. And if I look back at some of those skills, I think I've taken them into professional football. And when I have difficult conversations with players, as an example, or when I'm managing the other staff across the football club, being able to kind of build those relationships, know how to speak to them in an articulate way, and use some of the simple skills I've learned through Deloitte, like how to present, how to really probably try and get the best out of other people and get them to work together. But on contrast, I think I've learned a lot in professional football that I've tried to bring into professional working world, which is what the transition phase is about, is trying to help elite athletes who have developed under very pressurized environments from a young age to understand what their transferable skills are and then talk to them in a language that us in a professional working environment can understand. You know, it's simple things like managing my time, being able to, I suppose, show resilience. You're constantly being criticised and given feedback quite openly by teammates and coaches. So you quickly learn at a young age you've got to be your own worst critic. And I think that's probably one of my strengths when I look at it from a Deloitte angle, that I take feedback very, very well. And I think, right, if I've got negative feedback or constructive feedback, how do I do better? What do I need to do next? And I suppose there's some of the skills that I've been able to transfer from one to the other. And it's just, I think, just about understanding how you can do it. Some of them aren't transferable, but some of them are just understanding what environment you're in and how to tailor it to the environment, I think.
And in your colleagues on the football side of things, are they doing it as a bit of a side hustle as well, or are you a bit of a USP in that you're kind of coming at it from this professional angle?
I think it's a mixture. I mean, the women's setup at Charlton Athletic and most women's football is predominantly part-time, on the cusp of full-time when you look at the hours we actually do. But most of the other staff are within sports or coaching, so they may be personal trainers or coaches in the community or run their own coaching program during the day. I think the fascinating thing is actually the players. A lot of them have quite interesting backgrounds and they very inspiring actually. The players, I mean, we plan and prepare sessions and just deliver a session, but the players, some of them work in the city, some of them are still studying, some of them have, work for the NHS and they get to training each evening. They're the ones who have to run and put the hard work in. So I think there's a mixture.
Yeah.
But I always try and advocate to all staff and players that you need to be able to not look at these as separate careers, try and look at your lifestyle as one and see where you can transfer the skills. But I think the players are more inspiring than the staff, to be honest.
How do you fit it all in?
That was exactly going to be my question.
My mum often always asks me if I have a social life. And I do, thankfully. It's just not a huge one. I've always never just pursued one thing.
Yeah.
So it's just all that I've known. Even when I was playing, I was coaching as well as playing. And that might have had a detrimental effect to my playing career, actually, because other people potentially were focusing all their time on playing and maybe using their spare time to, analyse how they could get better at this or do extra sessions. Whereas, I don't know, I think it may have been my upbringing and background. I've got a very grounded family. I come from I'm a British Indian, so not many British Indians have a professional sporting background. So I was very humbled to have family who said, you need to think about other stuff, not just professional sport.
Yeah.
So I've always done it. I went through a period when I moved to London where I was just working and I was farming my CV out to lots of different football clubs to try and coach, and I really struggled with my time. I'm not a great TV watcher. I lose concentration quite quickly when I'm watching TV or films. And so I've always dedicated my time to other things. So for me, it feels normal and natural.
Yeah.
How do you manage your time, Nick?
Well, I mean, Yoke is now pretty all-consuming. I was doing Yoke alongside Deloitte for a while. It was, I found it hard, to be honest. Like it was great. So at the beginning, when I was doing 5 days a week Deloitte, and then essentially doing weekend pop-ups of Yoke, I just totally wrote off any social life for that bit. I mean, it wasn't a very long time, that initial while. I was living with my parents and just sort of I would work, come back Friday night, do some sort of prep for the weekend, then I would cook and do as much preparation as possible ahead of time all day on Saturday, and then take it up on Sunday, do the pop-up, bring it back, clean it up, go to bed, get up. And it was good, but it was full on. And so it was great to have been able to to kind of take the sabbatical for a bit to go and develop it, but also work part-time for a while. I'm just very impressed that you managed to keep it up over a long period, because it's hard for me to do, I'm just kind of all in on whatever the thing is that I'm doing. So it was I was able to do both at the same time, but I was tired, to be honest. Because,
even with all that caffeine or
yeah, exactly.
So you can increase the hours in your day as much as you can. But I guess that burnout.
Yeah. So, but I mean, it depends exactly what it is, and also it was totally new to me, so I was making loads of mistakes, and it was extra time consuming, and maybe over time, if I decided, because it could have been the case, I decided, you know what, this is great, I love doing the pop-up side of things, I don't want to pursue it in a bigger way, but I'll always do a bit of street food and a bit of the occasional pop-up. Maybe if I'd got to a stage where I actually knew what I was doing a bit better, and I could have managed it in a way that was a bit more sustainable, but I never did. So it just seems it's impressive you managed to do both.
And do you ever fear about burning out a bit, Riteesh, in what you're doing, or do you just?
To be honest, I've experienced it, and it's often my family and parents who kind of have to reiterate that you need to take some time out sometimes. And football is all consuming. It's a long season. You probably only get a month off throughout the whole year. And even through that period, like at the moment in my role, that will be filled with planning for the next season, player recruitment. I think to your point, Nick, though, about learning and making mistakes, I've gone through that. But I'm very fortunate that it's not just myself. I have lots of other coaches and other staff who really help you and are, I suppose, similar to Deloitte. They can go and manage their own workload. It's not as if I now am overseeing a lot of work. I delegate quite a lot. I've learned to do that. I learn now to really be specific with my time. So I no longer have football-related conversations with players, as an example, during the day or whilst I'm at work, which I've had to learn through time. But I do certainly think that I'm learning the triggers of when actually this is becoming a little bit too much. I need to take a time out. It might be just a weekend, or it might be simple things like going for a walk, or turning my phone off, or just reminding myself that you need to take some time for yourself. Being a coach, your focus is always on other people, 20 odd players, the other staff around you. But I think it's the family and friends that I've got who remind me of that often. So I've got better at it, I suppose.
And how do your sort of Deloitte family, as it were, support you, like colleagues, managers? Have they been, showing support in terms of flexibility, understanding for your time?
Well, I think when I first joined Deloitte, which is about 3.5 years ago now, I was fairly open during my interview stage that, look, I've got a second career. It's a passion of mine. But it's in evenings and it's at the weekends. So my time never really conflicts. If I need to leave early, my team are great, and the managers I've had have been great about allowing me to come in earlier and potentially leave earlier. And I suppose that's the fortune of not necessarily being, having a client to deliver for and having to go on client site for it, as an example. I think if my role was more client driven, it may be a little bit more difficult. But my managers have been great, giving me the flexibility. And you asked me the support that my teams provide me. Some guys from HR, they've come to watch my games. They're regularly dropping me emails on a Monday morning, say great result at the weekend, or what happened at the weekend.
They need to avoid you if it's been a bad result. Yeah.
And I think they now know that if I'm in a grumpy mood on a Monday morning, it's probably because I lost on the Sunday. But no, I think everybody's been fantastic, and they show great support, great passion. And the good thing is they don't treat me any differently, and I would never want them to. If I would want people to expect work from me at Deloitte and give me the same expectations of the people. It's my choice, and I like to think my teams and people around me don't treat me differently, but they just enjoy the conversation about football.
Yeah, I mean, I found the same thing. People were amazingly supportive, sort of surprisingly in a way. I mean, especially with the fact that I was aiming to then go off and do my sabbatical and go part-time, reduce the hours I was going to be working. All of certainly my colleagues and immediate managers, but also all the partners who were, who I worked for regularly or who were sort of head of the practice, were amazingly supportive and, were so positive about me going off and trying to pursue it, which was great. And I think it's a good story, and it's a good principle that you want your team to go and do whatever makes them happy and whatever they're passionate about. And if that means that someone either goes and does something for a bit and it's great, but then they carry on working, or if they go do something and they decide that's the path they want to go down, in the long term, that's just so much of a healthier environment in which to be, and somewhere people want to be and people want to come and join as graduates if they know that that's the kind of attitude that the company takes. So yeah, no, it was fantastic. And yeah, I think, as you say, you just kind of have to manage your time and make sure, you know, sadly the amount of work required and expected doesn't change. You still got to do it. So I mean, I definitely got better at managing my time just out of sheer necessity. I was always quite bad at managing my time and always end up being quite bad at procrastinating, and then end up staying later than I needed to, and just, you know, just getting it done in the end, but it could have been a lot less painful. And it just forced me, like, especially when I was part-time, because you kind of end up doing 4 or 5 days work in 3, because no one really knows or especially cares that you're part-time. I found, like, people, it works, you know, projects still have to get done, client doesn't care, it's got to be done by this time. So you end up having to do a lot to fit it all in, but you just kind of get pretty ruthless about getting in, get on with it, which I never used to be. So I think it's been good from that perspective.
Yeah, it sort of drives productivity if you have set deadlines. You have to make it work in order for you to do the passion you want to do.
Yeah, out of sheer just fear of not getting things done. Better get going.
Yeah. One of the concerns people may have is that your time is split between your various projects, your sort of your day-to-day work and your side hustle project. Did you ever get that sort of feedback from your colleagues or peers at all? And what would you say to people who may be feeling that a little bit?
I suppose it never really came up in my instance. I think it is down to you. You know, if you're doing something on the side, whatever it may be, I suppose it's down to you to make sure that it doesn't interfere too much. I mean, that's easier said than done. But was lucky enough in my case that for the relatively shorter period that I was doing it, it didn't tend to. It certainly wasn't noticed as being as interfering. I think. Yeah, I mean, frankly, just had to work harder to make sure that it didn't. But I think if you're really inspired to do it and you're really driven to do it, kind of know the deal. I think that you can't just say, okay, I'll do this, but I'm therefore going to do my normal job at 75%. Yeah. I think that it just, in the kind of environment that Deloitte is, it would just be picked up, it would be noticed. It doesn't really function like that. You need to be, you know, performing at a good level. So
and obviously, but you know, since or in recent times, you obviously handed in your notice, and now you're working full time, 100% for Yoke. Yeah. Did you get a few raised eyebrows when you sort of did that?
Like, honestly, not at all. People were very supportive. I actually thought I was going to be leaving full time when I went on my sabbatical. I thought, right, this is it. I'm off. It's a sabbatical, but this is definitely going to work. And sort of wrote an email to everyone saying, guys, I might not be back. And then slightly had to come back with my tail between my legs 3 months later. But everyone was very supportive of that fact and kind of brought me back into the fold. But like, genuinely, everyone on the team was extremely supportive, all wanted it to succeed. And I think the reality is, had they not been as supportive, I like to think I would have had, you know, been ballsy enough to go for it anyway, which would have just meant that I still left with a dimmer view of the firm, would have left, you know, it would have made it a lot harder for me to succeed as well. But also, you know, I don't think it's the right thing to say, you don't want people to go and succeed in something else and leave us, so let's just quash that and not make it happen. Doesn't feel like the kind of culture that Deloitte is about and wants to be about. So I think you know, the reality is it's a kind of high churn industry. A lot of people do come, and they're not necessarily looking to work all the way up from, you know, analyst up to partner. Some do, and that's great. But some come and they want to come and take advantage of all the great learning, all the training you can get here. So many people might leave after 2 years, after 5 years, after 10 years. But that's just part of the nature of the beast at Deloitte. And all those people go, if they've been treated well and looked after, they go as friends, and they will tell me to come and join here. They will potentially bring business to Deloitte in their future careers down the line. So I just think it feels to me like the natural thing to do is to support your people. And aside from the fact that it just feels like the right thing to do, full stop. But I think it makes sense from a business point of view as well.
Plus, you're still, quite obviously an advocate for Deloitte. You're back here with us in the building.
I've got to be. I'm just downstairs.
This is going to be a bit awkward as well. But you're even back in the area, so you still be quite fond of us.
Yeah, no, I think you just end up leaving feeling like, oh, that was a great experience, and CAP ended in a really nice way. And it just leaves you with that positive impression and that positive feeling towards the firm. And I think the more of that, the better.
There's this question around the millennial question as well. I think something like 25% of people have side hustles, astonishingly, but for millennials, it's a third. Do you think that makes a difference, and as a reason you feel almost obligated to start up a second project, a passion project?
I mean, for me, it doesn't feed into it necessarily. It doesn't consciously feed into it for me. I'm just doing it because it was something that directionally I always knew I wanted to do. Just vaguely something off my own bat, wanted to go and push forward. I don't know that it's a sort of, in my particular instance, it doesn't feel like a circumstantial thing or a trend thing or whatever it might be. It was just sort of the way that it all panned out, and I'm lucky to have been in a situation where I could go and pursue it. That needn't have been the case.
Yeah.
So for me, not especially, but lucky to be able to do it.
I think it's very much based on you as an individual. I mean, certain people, it sounds like from Nick, his experience of food has kind of led him towards putting a lot of passion into food. My experience of professional football and probably losing my identity as a professional footballer, I then had probably slightly different purpose towards having a side hustle. And I, at the moment where I am, I suppose, mentally, is I would always want to have more purposes than one. I would always feel like I would want to have a professional career at Deloitte, for example, as well as, because I have, I suppose, a bit of anxiety around always having the identity of one thing. And I think that comes down to just me as an individual wanting and seeking different things to fulfill different needs. So I think individuals consciously have different things they want fulfilled, right? They want to have personal connections, they want to feel like they're growing, they want to feel stable, but also want lots of variety and change. And for me, I've never been able to fully have all in one profession. So I think what works great for me is I can get different types of growth from professional sport or helping elite athletes develop it through career transition. I can get my personal connections through different types of work. So I just feel like I get all my fulfillment from different purposes, if that makes sense. And I think slightly it is an ego thing as well. I think that, my growing up in a very male-dominant sport like professional football, from the age of 9 to 20, and now, as a coach, I've not really known another environment than quite a male-dominant environment until now. I'm working within female football, but actually the environment's quite similar. So I have this kind of experience of needing some ego to be like really fulfilled, and I don't want to get that through a professional career. So I've received very different environments through Deloitte and professional football, and I have quite different characteristics actually sometimes as a coach, and I think you need to. I did a Myers-Briggs personality profile with all the players and staff at Charlton recently, and so many different types of personalities, so you're almost forced as a manager to be able to dip into those, and you sometimes have to manage people who've got quite big egos. I would never do that at Deloitte. I'm not in the environment where I'd have to do that.
Do you ever accidentally bring it in? Just like come in, act up on a Monday morning. Oh wait, sorry.
That's what I was picturing. Like, no.
Someone in your tracksuit, so you see.
This rubbish ref.
Fortunately, I've learned the two different environments, but it could get me into a bit of trouble actually if I did. But I think that I get a little bit of being able to manage different personalities in professional football, and then likewise here, I have very articulate conversations at Deloitte, very different expectations. So I think that the two careers, or three, I suppose, with the career transition phase, just fulfill me in different needs. And I, having been used to that, would, I think, really struggle if I just had one. So for that reason, I think coming to Deloitte, knowing that I've got other things that fulfill me in other areas, just makes me really positive when I come into work, really focused. I feel like I know my purpose here. And then when I leave, I know my other purpose. For me at the moment, it's working well.
So just to your point, Riteesh, about finding fulfillment and purpose, the Voice of the Workforce survey, which was conducted with European workers, across the board, found that 32% of workers felt like they didn't quite have enough stimulation in their job, and 36% felt their job was meaningless. So I think there definitely is something in that as to finding purpose and fulfillment, alongside your job. It doesn't necessarily all need to come from the one place. And just for looking at it from the flip side, from the employer's perspective, I'm guessing definitely in your case, it would have been a deal breaker had Deloitte not been as flexible.
For me personally, yes. And I think, but I've never had to change my hours at work, as an example. I think I've just had to have the understanding of my manager that if I potentially needed to leave early, I would, but I tend to get in early to give me that flexibility. To Nick's point earlier, it's down to me to be very strict with my time, manage my own time. So you do find less time to procrastinate when you're at work. But I think I was conscious of that when I applied for Deloitte, and it's one of the reasons why I didn't necessarily apply for a client service role or a client-facing role, because I knew that it was less about me managing my career potentially. So I think that it's going to be different for different circumstances. I think the firm are definitely getting better. And I've met a lot of people at the firm actually who come from an elite sporting background who are in the client service teams. And, actually the clients are understanding. And especially when you have quite an impactful story about, actually I need to, I'm training in these nights. As long as you're clear up front, I think most people are understanding.
Yeah. What about you, Nick?
Well, I think that's a really good point about being open and honest with clients as well, because I kind of said semi-jokingly earlier that the client doesn't really care if you're doing this other stuff or not. They just want the work done. I think maybe actually that's the perception, but I think Riteesh is right that the client does care, and they are interested and flexible. And if there's if there's a really interesting story behind it and a clear rationale, they're a lot more willing to be flexible, I think, than perhaps we might assume. And I think sometimes there can be a tendency, or there certainly was in some of my teams and projects, that you're kind of so eager to please the client and make sure that they're happy and everything's done on time, that you don't have necessarily the confidence to push back on, whether it's push back on a deadline or say, we can't actually do that Tuesday because this person's away on holiday doing their side hustle, whatever it might be. And then, the inevitable reality is, or upshot is that you end up getting into a pickle and you're struggling because you're short-staffed and you have, I just think being open and honest and upfront about it is the way to go and makes a big difference, both internally but also externally. Because, I think it's like a good thing in terms of PR externally and how our clients perceive us and perceive us as supporting our teams.
Plus, clients are also employers as well, and so they're probably grappling with exactly the same issue with their people. And we dug up some research that showed from Henley Business School that showed that I think UK PLC, like our businesses in this country, stand to lose more than £340 million if they don't engage with their talent, if they don't incentivise people by saying, look, we appreciate that you're whole individuals and you've got other things beyond work. So I think this is another reason why we're starting to hopefully see more flexibility from our clients.
So Nick and Riteesh, we're near the end of this podcast, and I guess there's a couple of questions just to try and wrap things up. Do you have a top tip for anyone who's possibly thinking about entering into a side hustle at the moment?
Mine would just be get as much advice as you possibly can. I mean, I've been very lucky to have had loads of tips from both people in the firm, my colleagues, friends, but also people in the industry I was trying to get into, who, there's loads of people out there trying to do similar side hustles, whatever it may be, I'm sure. So certainly there were, in my instance, loads of people doing a pop-up on the side of a job or starting from scratch when they didn't know what they were doing. And even if they were just sort of a little bit ahead of me, they could give me the benefit of their, mistakes or wisdom or whatever had happened previously. And it's just been, so lucky to have had so many people to speak to and ask about it. And it's made all the difference. Like, it wouldn't be still going today if it weren't for all the good advice we'd had. So I think, just if you're thinking about it, try and find someone who's doing something similar or wants to or has once in the past and see how they did it.
Great. Riteesh, do you have any advice?
I don't know if I can top that answer though. I think one of the critical things for me is making sure that if you are starting out a side hustle, it's hard for me to describe football coaching as a side hustle, to be honest, but perhaps slightly differently to Nick, is because mine is adjacent to my professional career, don't look at it as a second job. If you're starting something out, I think it should be a passion. And actually, people who are listening to the pod and many companies, they may have real side passions, just like football coaching. They may love doing arts. They may love writing. They may love blogging. So I think whatever your side hustle is, it starts as your passion. But I would say don't ever lose that it's a passion. If you start to do it more, that doesn't mean you should lose the passion for it, because I've not once thought that football is a second job. I always see it as a passion. I think once I see something as a second job, I think it's probably time for me to find another purpose or another passion. So I think that would be my one advice. But, just because you don't earn money from it doesn't mean it's not a side hustle. Just because you might be able to spend more time on it, I'll do that. You never know what fulfillment it could give you. I think especially things like, if you're a creative person, but your job isn't creative at work, doesn't mean you have to leave Deloitte or wherever you are to go and find a creative job. You can really try and figure out what creative things you could do outside of work and get that real fulfillment through different ways. And I think you would be able to become more productive or more positive when you're at work as well.
Both sound advice from both of you. That's great. And before I get you to answer the actual question of the week, Riteesh, you're third in the table. Big game against Man United this weekend.
Yes.
Top two get promoted.
I like the way you plugged that in. Big game. It's actually, we had I don't know if you're aware, but we had a fixture against Manchester United about a month ago, and it got kind of crazy circumstances. The game got abandoned after 10 minutes.
Ooh.
Because of quite a freak injury that we had with one of our players. And Manchester United weren't best pleased. They had to travel overnight, stay in London, play 10 minutes of the game and had to go home. So on top of being Manchester United, and on top of being it third versus second, and on top of being it the top two get promoted, I think there's a little bit of spice to the game this weekend. So we're looking forward to it. There were actually a few Deloitte colleagues who came to watch the game. Their first time watching women's football, and now they think every women's football match ends after 10 minutes with an ambulance. But we've got a big game this weekend, so preparations are going well.
Well, if the club's ever looking for a free podcast sponsor, then I'm sure we can get some banners arranged for that. So, good luck, best of luck. And so finally, guys, I think it's that the big question is: do you think your side hustle makes you more productive at work?
Yeah, I mean, going back a few, I think it definitely did. Albeit, it also ultimately led to me pursuing it full time. But while I was doing them, working both alongside each other, it just made me so much more productive, out of necessity. But I do think that I've carried that through now. I am much better at structuring my time, just getting on with things basically, and not leaving it and sort of overthinking things. I just kind of become a lot more decisive out of force of necessity. So yeah, I think yes.
I would say yes, but not at the start. I struggled at the start to manage my time. Once I was able to learn how to manage my time, become more strict with time, made me a lot more productive, not just at Deloitte, but outside of work as well. And I've probably learned that over time. But I think for me, it's less about just the time. It's more about me go back to it, the satisfaction and fulfillment from other walks of life. So it means when I come to Deloitte, my mind is really focused. I feel that every day when I come to work, and it means that when I've got work to do, I get my work done because I know how precious my own time is.
Great. Nick, Riteesh, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. Next time, tune in as we ask our next big question. This podcast is produced by our very own pod squad and hosted by George Parrett, Lizzie Elston, Ethan Worth and Dara Latinwo. Thanks to our creative studio for their technical support. Original music by Ali Barrett from our consulting team.
As an audit firm, Deloitte has an outside interest policy, and obviously Nick and Riteesh fully in compliant with that. If you are looking to do your own side hustle, please get in touch with the team who will point you in the right direction.